The house stood on a flat, featureless plain under a vast, empty sky. Dust, fine as powdered bone, settled on everything: the cracked windowsills, the drooping blades of grass, the very air itself. The silence here wasn't peaceful. It was empty, a hollow space where laughter used to live. This was Leo's world, a kingdom of beige and grey ruled by a quiet, suffocating kind of sorrow. At 8 years old, Leo had learned to be a ghost. He moved through the rooms of the old farmhouse on stockinged feet, a small shadow gliding past faded floral wallpaper. He learned that the floorboards only creaked if you put your full weight down, so he walked on the balls of his feet. He learned that a breath taken too deeply could be heard from the next room, so he breathed in shallow sips. Survival was a lesson in subtraction. The less of himself he was, the safer he felt. His stepmother, Martha, was a woman carved from ice and disapproval. She wasn't loud. Her cruelty didn't come in the form of screams, but in the sharp, cutting edge of her sighs. It was in the way she placed his dinner plate on the table with a little too much force. It was in the words that fell from her lips like chips of stone. A boy your age should be useful, not just present. Leo's father had been a man of warmth and booming laughter, a man who smelled of sawdust and sunshine. After he was gone, all that warmth had been buried with him, leaving only the cold presence of the woman he had married. For Martha, Leo was not a son. He was a relic of a life that was not hers, a final, unwanted responsibility. His only escape was a small box of crayon stubs he kept hidden under his bed. In the quiet prison of his room, he would draw worlds bursting with impossible color, skies of blazing orange, forests of electric blue, and talking animals with kind, smiling eyes. They were secrets no one could touch. That changed on a Tuesday. A rattling pickup truck pulled up the long, dusty driveway, carrying a final piece of his father's world, an old dog. His name was Kaiser, a Belgian Malinois who had served as his father's canine partner for 6 years. Now his muzzle was dusted with grey, and a slight stiffness had settled into his powerful hind legs. Martha accepted him with a familiar, long-suffering sigh. "Another useless mouth to feed," she'd muttered, not looking at Leo, but he knew the words were meant for him too. Leo saw Kaiser for the first time in the barren backyard. The dog stood still, surveying his new, bleak surroundings. His ears, once perpetually pricked with alertness, were held in a neutral, patient position. His dark, intelligent eyes swept over the yard, the fence, the dilapidated barn, and finally, they landed on Leo, who was watching from the kitchen window. For a long moment their gazes locked. There was no wagging tail, no joyful bark. There was only a silent, profound recognition. It was the meeting of two lonely souls, two beings who had lost their purpose and were now adrift in a world that no longer felt like home. But in the quiet gaze of the old dog, for the first time in a long, long time, Leo felt something he had long since buried. He felt seen. Kaiser spent the first few days in a state of quiet observation. He was a creature of duty and discipline, and his new environment was a puzzle he was methodically trying to solve. He watched the way the dust motes danced in the slivers of sunlight that pierced the grimy windows. He watched the way Martha moved through the house, a whirlwind of sharp angles and quiet resentment. Most of all, he watched Leo. He saw the boy flinch when Martha entered a room. He saw how Leo's shoulders would hunch, making him seem even smaller than he was. He saw the way Leo would hold his breath until his stepmother had passed. Kaiser, a dog trained to detect the subtle tells of fear, deceit, and danger, recognized the scent of deep-seated terror that clung to the boy like a second skin. His protection began subtly, almost imperceptibly. One evening at the dinner table, Leo's hand trembled as he reached for the salt, knocking over his glass of water. The liquid spread across the oilcloth tablecloth in a dark, accusing stain. "Clumsy," Martha hissed, her voice low but sharp as a needle. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. As she moved toward Leo, Kaiser, who had been lying silently in the corner, rose to his feet. He didn't growl. He didn't bark. He simply walked forward and stood between Martha's path and Leo's chair, a calm, physical impediment. Martha stopped, taken aback. "Get out of the way, you stupid animal." Kaiser didn't move. He just looked at her with his dark, knowing eyes. After a tense moment, Martha let out an exasperated scoff and returned to her seat, her anger momentarily diffused by the dog's quiet defiance. Leo, watching from behind his own small hands, felt a flicker of something warm in his chest. From that day on, Kaiser became Leo's shadow. When Leo went to his room to draw, the old dog would lie down across the threshold, a furry, breathing barrier to the rest of the house. When Leo had to go to the outhouse after dark, Kaiser would walk beside him, a silent escort in the oppressive darkness. He never demanded a pet or a treat. His companionship was a quiet, constant offering, a presence that began to slowly push back against the crushing weight of Leo's loneliness. One afternoon, Leo was lost in his art, drawing a magnificent winged lion with a crayon of brilliant gold. Martha entered without a sound. Before Leo could hide it, she snatched the drawing from his hands. "What is this nonsense?" she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Wasting your time with foolish fantasies. Your head is as empty as your mother's was." With a single sharp tear, she ripped the golden lion in two and let the pieces flutter to the floor. Leo didn't cry. He just stared at the wreckage of his creation. After Martha had swept out of the room, he felt a wet nose nudge his hand. Kaiser had come over, and he gently pushed one of the torn pieces of paper toward Leo with his snout. He then lay his head on Leo's knee and looked up at him, as if to say, "I saw. I know what this meant to you." The alliance was sealed, but Martha saw it too. She saw the way the boy had started to hold his head a little higher when the dog was near. She saw the way the dog watched her every move. The resentment in her heart, once directed solely at the boy, now had a new target. "Don't get too attached," she said to Leo one evening, watching as he secretly slipped a piece of his own meager dinner to Kaiser under the table. "Old dogs have a way of disappearing, especially the ones who don't know their place." The threat hung in the air, cold and sharp, and a new, terrifying fear took root in Leo's heart. Not for himself, but for the only friend he had in the world. The breaking point arrived on a cold, windswept Saturday. It was the anniversary of Leo's father's death, a day Martha always treated with a special kind of simmering rage, as if his passing were a personal inconvenience she was forced to remember. Leo had been quiet all day, retreating into himself, his only comfort the small wooden music box his father had given him. It was a simple thing, carved with a clumsy-looking horse, and when wound, it played a tinny, slightly off-key version of "You Are My Sunshine." It was the only tangible piece of his father's love he had left. Martha, fueled by a glass of cheap wine and a deep-seated bitterness, found him with it in the living room. "Still clinging to that old piece of junk?" she sneered. "Your father is gone. He's not coming back. This won't bring him back." Leo clutched the music box tighter. "It was his," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "It's just wood and gears," she said, her eyes flashing with a cruel impulse. She snatched it from his hands. "It belongs in the fire, with all the other useless memories." She turned toward the hearth, where a low fire smoldered against the autumn chill. As she raised her arm to throw it into the flames, a low sound rumbled through the room. It was Kaiser. He had moved from his spot by the door and now stood directly in front of the fireplace, blocking her path. His body was tense, his head was low, and for the first time his lips were curled back, just enough to reveal the white tips of his canines. A growl, deep and resonant, vibrated from his chest. It was not the bark of a startled dog. It was the deliberate, controlled warning of a trained protector who had identified a threat and would not stand down. "Move, you flea-bitten beast!" Martha shrieked, her composure cracking. Kaiser did not move. His growl deepened. His eyes, fixed on hers, held a chilling intensity. It was a clear, unequivocal statement: "You will not pass." Watching this, Seeing the old dog's unwavering courage, something shifted inside Leo. A tiny, dormant ember of defiance, long buried under years of fear, began to glow. He took a shaky step forward. "Please," he said, his voice trembling but clear, louder than he had spoken in years. "Don't, it's from my dad." The two unexpected acts of defiance, the dog's physical barrier and the boy's sudden voice, seemed to stun Martha. Her face twisted in a mask of fury and disbelief. For a moment, she seemed poised to strike the dog, but something in Kaiser's stance, a promise of swift and certain retaliation, made her hesitate. With a scream of pure frustration, she hurled the music box not into the fire, but onto the wooden floor, where it landed with a sharp crack. A small piece of the carved horse chipped off. Then she stormed out of the room, slamming the door so hard a picture frame rattled on the wall. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't empty. It was filled with the panting of the old dog and the ragged breaths of the small boy. The battle was over. For now. Leo slowly walked over and picked up the damaged music box. He then knelt on the floor beside Kaiser, his small hands sinking into the dog's thick fur. He buried his face against the dog's neck, and for the first time since his father had died, he wept. He cried for his father, for his loneliness, for his fear, but mostly he cried with a profound, overwhelming sense of gratitude. Kaiser didn't move. He simply stood there, a steadfast pillar in the storm, and occasionally he would lick the salty tears from the boy's cheek. The line had been drawn, and a guardian had chosen his charge. The house grew colder in the days that followed. The silent war between Martha and Kaiser had escalated. She no longer spoke to the dog, only glared at him with a look of pure venom. She started leaving the back gate open, accidentally, hoping he would wander off. But Kaiser, ever vigilant, never strayed far from Leo's side. Finally, Martha made her move. One morning, Leo watched from his window as she stood in the yard, talking on her phone. She was using a sweet, concerned voice he rarely heard. "Yes, he's just gotten so unpredictable," she said. "He growled at me. I'm afraid for the boy's safety. I think he needs to be picked up." An hour later, a white van from the County Animal Care and Control pulled into the driveway. A young woman in a uniform, with a kind face and a name tag that read Sarah, stepped out. "I'm here about a potentially aggressive dog," she said, looking at Martha, who had composed her face into a mask of worried sincerity. "Oh, thank you for coming so quickly," Martha said, wringing her hands. "It's Kaiser. He was my late husband's, and I think he's just gone bad. I'm so worried about Leo." Sarah nodded, her eyes professional but perceptive. "Let me see the dog, please." Kaiser was in the yard with Leo. As Sarah approached with a catchpole, a tool of her trade, Kaiser didn't show any aggression towards her. Instead, he did something that made Sarah pause. He walked calmly to Leo, sat down beside the boy, and gently nudged his hand, looking up at him with soft, reassuring eyes. Sarah lowered the catchpole. She had seen aggressive dogs. This was not one of them. This was a dog performing a duty. "Can I talk to your son for a moment?" she asked Martha. "He's my stepson," Martha corrected, her voice tight. "And he's very shy. He doesn't talk much." "That's all right," Sarah said, her gaze not leaving the boy and the dog. "I'd still like to try." Reluctantly, Martha allowed it. Sarah knelt in the dusty yard, not too close to Leo. She didn't ask about Kaiser or about being afraid. She pointed to a smudge of blue crayon on Leo's finger. "What do you like to draw?" she asked gently. Leo looked at Kaiser, who gave a soft whoof of encouragement. Hesitantly, Leo led her to his room. He knelt by his bed and pulled out the worn cardboard box. He didn't say anything, just opened the lid. Sarah saw dozens of drawings. Most were of colorful fantasy worlds, but at the bottom of the pile there was one that made her breath catch. It was drawn on the back of a torn piece of a utility bill. It depicted a small, stick-figure boy huddled in a dark corner of a room. Looming over him was a large, angry shadow figure. But standing directly in front of the boy, facing the shadow, was a large golden-colored dog. The dog was the only thing in the drawing that had any color, a vibrant shield of gold against a world of gray and black. Sarah looked at the drawing, then at Leo, then at Kaiser, who stood faithfully at the boy's side. She understood everything. She walked back outside, her expression now firm. "Ma'am," she said to Martha, "Kaiser's behavior isn't aggressive, it's protective. I have some serious concerns, but they're not about the dog." She pulled out her own phone. As Martha's face paled, Sarah made a call, her voice low but clear. "Yes, this is Sarah from Animal Care. I'm at the Miller residence. I need a supervisor and a representative from Child Protective Services to meet me here. Immediately." The silent war was over. The rescue had begun. As Leo watched the scene unfold from his window, he reached down and wrapped his arms around Kaiser's neck. He wasn't leaving with a suitcase full of clothes or toys. He was leaving with his drawings and with his guardian. He didn't look back at the house, only forward, at the white van that represented a world beyond the dust and the silence. The healing was not a single event, but a slow, quiet dawn. Leo and Kaiser were placed in a foster home, a small, cheerful house with a green lawn run by Sarah, the animal control officer who had a special license for emergency placements. The air in her home smelled of cinnamon and laundry soap, a stark contrast to the dust and decay of the farmhouse. The silence here was different too. It was a comfortable, peaceful quiet, filled with the gentle ticking of a clock and the soft snores of Kaiser sleeping at the foot of Leo's new bed. Leo was still a quiet boy. The ghosts of Martha's words, of her cold presence, did not vanish overnight. But the constant, crushing weight on his shoulders began to lift, millimeter by millimeter. He started walking with his head up, no longer scanning the floor for creaky boards. He started drawing at the kitchen table, leaving his creations out in the open instead of hiding them under his bed. One afternoon, Sarah sat with him while he sketched. He was drawing a picture of a vast, open field under a bright blue sky. In the middle of it, a boy and a dog walked side by side. There were no walls, no shadows, no looming figures. "That's a beautiful place," Sarah said softly. Leo looked at his drawing, then at Kaiser, and for the first time he tried to explain the world inside his head. "It's the quiet place," he said, his voice a little more than a whisper. "It's where you can hear yourself think." Kaiser showed it to me. The story of Kaiser, the silent guardian, was a quiet one. There was no single, dramatic act of rescue from a burning building or a raging river. His heroism was stitched together from 1,000 small, unseen moments. It was in the way he stood as a buffer, the way he nudged a torn drawing, the way he refused to leave the boy's side. He had not saved Leo from a physical death, but from a spiritual one. He had stood guard over the boy's flickering soul until someone else was finally able to see the light. In the end, it is these quiet battles that often define us. The world is full of noise, of loud demands and harsh judgments, but sometimes all we need is a guardian of the silence, a loyal friend who simply stays, who stands with us in the darkness, and whose steadfast presence reminds us that we are not invisible, that we are not a burden, and that we are worthy of being seen. True strength isn't always about the roar. Sometimes it's about the quiet, unwavering heartbeat of a friend who refuses to let you face the world alone.